Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners and welcome back to Nighttime. I'm your host, Jordan, and tonight we're going to be catching up with a past guest and revisiting one of the most chilling and complex cases Nighttime has covered, the murder of Taylor Samson. Back in 2015, the murder of Taylor Samson sent shockwaves through Halifax and beyond. It's a case that left many unanswered questions and shed light on the darker undercurrents of Halifax's university scene, as well as our drug trade. If you've been following my coverage of Taylor's story, you'll remember our prior 4 episodes in the series. Initially, we had journalist and author Kayla Hounsell join us for a 2-part deep dive into the disappearance and murder of Taylor Samson and the trial of William Sandeson, the man who was convicted in Taylor's murder. In a follow-up episode, we met with Taylor's younger brother Connor, who described life with and without his best friend and protector. And then, as a result of a surprise court decision, Kayla came back for an update episode after it was announced that William Sandeson's original conviction was tossed on appeal and that a new trial was going to be necessary. And that brings us to this episode. Kayla Hounsell just released Second Degree, an updated version of her best-selling book on the original trial, and she's here to talk about it, as well as fill us in on the bizarre twists and turns that occurred during William Sandeson's second trial, a trial which presented a completely different story than the one we heard during the first. So let's get into it. Tonight, in this episode of Nighttime, I'm going to be joined by Kayla Hounsell to discuss the murder of Taylor Samson and the second trial of William Sandeson.
The William Sandeson case dates back to 2015. 22-year-old Taylor Samson went missing in August of that year and hasn't been seen since. Sandeson was charged with first-degree murder. Police believe he killed Samson during a drug deal gone wrong and disposed of his body. Sandeson's trial in 2017 took more than 2 months. There were a number of delays, and at one point his defense lawyer asked for a mistrial, saying the Crown didn't properly disclose evidence. This centers on the testimony of 2 key witnesses. They originally told police they didn't see anything on the night of the alleged murder, but after talking to a private investigator hired by the defense, the 2 men changed their story, and their testimony was explosive. But the judge didn't grant a mistrial, and Sandeson was found guilty by the jury. He appealed, and the appeal court now says a mistrial should have been granted.
For people new to this show and to your book, or books I should say, maybe give a quick introduction on who you are and maybe tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm Kayla Hounsell. I'm an author and journalist. In my day job, I'm the CBC's national reporter for the Maritime Provinces. And 10 years ago, almost now, I started covering the case of William Sandeson and Taylor Samson. So in August 2015, I was a local news reporter at that time. And, we hear that there's a guy in Halifax who's gone missing and his family is going around putting up missing persons posters. I did the very first interview with his mother when she was desperately trying to find him. And shortly thereafter, William Sandeson was convicted or charged first with the first-degree murder of Taylor Samson. He was convicted in 2017 and then of first-degree murder. And then in 2020, he won his appeal, and the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal overturned his conviction and granted him a new trial. That trial happened in 2023, and this time he was convicted of second degree. So my first book, which was released in 2018, was called First Degree. The second book is now called Second Degree. Writes itself, really.
Yeah, it does. But it's you find yourself in an interesting position because when First Degree comes out, it's a best-selling book telling the story of a high-profile crime and the resulting trial. But just after not long after the book comes out is when that conviction was quashed and there was going to be a retrial, which kind of puts you in a unique position to, what do you do with a book about a case that kind of doesn't matter anymore in a way. But we'll get into what you do when you find yourself in that position. I want to first ask you, the last time we talked, it's been about 3 years now. We last spoke just after William Sandeson was granted a retrial. Right. what have you been doing with the last 3 years of your life? And before you even answer it, how do you find the time to do all this? People will hear your voice and you're like, oh, it's, the voice of CBC.
Well, thank you. I mean, gosh, yeah, it's been a really busy few years. Most of that time I have been working for the CBC, well, all of that time, but I've been doing this on the side. So I've had some wonderful opportunities in my work at the CBC. I'm just recently back from a trip to Belgium where I was a part of really special coverage where that country was honoring Indigenous Canadians who were veterans of the First World War. I spent a few weeks reporting in the UK. I went to Maine and did a deep dive into the elver fishing industry because the elver fishing industry in Nova Scotia was shut down for a plethora of problems. I spent some time reporting from a refugee camp in northern Kenya. I was in Kenya for a couple of months as part of a partnership with Journalists for Human Rights, which is a Canadian media development organization. I also taught a course in journalism at the University of King's College here in Halifax. And for the past year and a half, I have been working on this book. So this has been a very significant part of my life, but it is something I do on the side. So it's been, evenings, what's left of them after I file for the national, weekends, and my vacation time doing this. So it's busy.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is pretty amazing that you managed to get all this done and do such an amazing job with everything you touch is
That's
awesome.
So kind. Thank you.
No, it's true. I'm a big fan. But let's get into the book here. So when you were last on, we did a couple episodes together after you released the book First Degree. Tell me about the decision you made to keep the book relevant by, I guess the right word would be rewriting, re-editing. Like what did you decide to do to deal with the problem of the trial your book was based on being granted a retrial? How do you deal with this?
So this book, Second Degree, is an updated and expanded edition of First Degree. It has been rewritten. So what I keep telling people are asking if they have to read them both. So no, you don't have to. You can read Second Degree, not have read First Degree, and still understand it. However, if you are a person who loves the details and is obsessed with this case, which many people I think are at this point, you will want to read them both still because the most detail possible is in First Degree. I have rewritten it, but the integrity of the story is maintained in Second Degree, and I've done 19 new in-depth interviews and written 7 new chapters in Second Degree. But the decision to do that, to come back to your question, was a really difficult one. The trial took place, I mentioned I was working in Kenya. The trial took place almost in that exact time period. I knew that would happen. So I was faced with this decision where after almost 10 years of covering every incremental update in this case, being at every court appearance. Everyone likes to talk about the trials, but the trials are the big show at the end, right? There were years in between where I was, as I say, taking my vacation, sometimes for weeks at a time, to sit in a courtroom when no one other than Taylor Samson's mother was there, no other journalists, because all of these bail hearings and pretrial arguments are all under a publication ban. And I was sitting in there taking all these notes, not really sure what I'm going to do with this or if I'm going to do anything with this. And then I decide after all of that to go to Kenya during the second trial, which wasn't easy. And also when I thought about this case, I didn't really think there would be a fundamental change in the outcome. And that made me think, well, if this trial plays out and it's the same outcome in the end, what do I need to do with that? Is there another book in that? And I thought, probably not. And so I went to Kenya and the trial began, and I was just kind of keeping one eye on that. And it was the same people telling the same stories until William Sandeson took the stand, which he did not in the first trial. And for nearly 4 days, there was this explosive, dramatic, sensational, it's hard to overstate it, testimony where he details for the first time in his own words to a court of law what he did with Taylor Samson. So now, I was in and following the play-by-play very closely from half a world away. And Nova Scotians began reaching out to me saying, is there going to be another book? Are you going to do another book? And I said no to several of them. I just thought, I'm not there. I'm not going to do that. And then the verdict came, and the verdict was different. And then I started to feel a journalistic responsibility to update this book so that the most complete version of the facts would be the one that I had put out into the world. I wasn't, journalistically, I just wasn't okay with just sitting on this product that was no longer the truth, really. It was true when I wrote it, but it wasn't the most complete version of the truth. And then I'd also been in touch with Taylor Samson's mother a little bit throughout the trial. And I just couldn't imagine asking her to do this again. I mean, this is a woman who has given me so much time and trust and access to this horrible thing that has happened to her. And I didn't want to ask her to do another interview. And then one day she said to me, do you think there's another book in this? And I said, well, are you going to do another interview? And she said, for you, anything. And then I just knew then that there would have to be another book. And here we are.
Wow. I want to get into a bit of the second trial, William Sandeson's retrial. You mentioned there that he had some explosive testimony where he told a different version of the story, a completely different version of the story than what he told during his first trial. But in this case, one thing I want to kind of point out is, like, I'm surprised that there even was two trials, because I feel like the evidence against him was so strong. And then to have to come up with two different versions of the story that both kind of include this evidence in a way to, for it all to make sense, that would be challenging to do. So before we get into his new version of what he did to Taylor Samson, in your mind, having followed this case as closely as you have, what were the most problematic pieces of evidence for William Sandeson? What do you think it was between the two trials as far as evidence that made it hard to deny his responsibility for this?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of evidence, and I'll come to what I think was the most significant, but I just want to comment on your note about the second trial being surprising. So I've asked a number of people about this, and some of the lawyers involved say, we honestly didn't really know if this was going to go all the way to a second trial. William Sandeson's defense lawyer, Alison Craig, who is a new lawyer to the case this time around, she came in from Toronto to do this, says that she was very surprised it went to a trial. She says in her experience, often there's just a plea deal. Somebody who's charged with murder will plead to manslaughter, everybody goes home. But she says in this case, the Crown wasn't willing to resolve to anything less than murder, and she wasn't willing to resolve to murder. So it did proceed. But there was a very real problem, right, in the first trial, which was that private investigator who was hired by the defense, who essentially went rogue and effectively started working for the other side, helping the police out of what he says was a moral obligation to do so. And in that regard, this is not surprising to those of us who've been following it really closely, because the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal said, yeah, okay, that was a real problem. And the way that it unfolded in the midst of a trial in front of the jury, a very novel legal issue that left everybody scrambling and the defense trying to figure out the best way forward here, that was a problem. And it was about William Sandeson's right to a fair trial, his ability to make full answer in defense, not the evidence. So I just want to say that. But to your point about the evidence, yes, there was an extraordinary body of evidence. Of course, the most significant part of evidence, most would say, was the body of Taylor Samson, which to this day has never been found. So that was missing in the evidence body. But I think about the surveillance video that showed William Sandeson and Taylor Samson entering William Sandeson's apartment on that night in question, August 15th, 2015. William Sandeson is seen coming and going. Taylor Samson never leaves. The video is shut off for an hour and a half that night. There were a significant number of text messages, which the Crown argued showed that Sandeson lured Taylor Samson to his apartment that night. There was all kinds of evidence found on the Sandeson family farm, and Taylor Samson's DNA found all over it. And there were these two witnesses, right? They became the star witnesses, Justin Blades and Pukil McCabe. They didn't witness the murder, but they witnessed the immediate aftermath of the murder. They said that they looked into William Sandeson's apartment on that night, and, Sandeson was running around in a panic, and there was blood and money and drugs all over the place. And they saw a man. They didn't know Taylor Samson, so they couldn't identify him. But there was a man slumped over in a chair with blood running out of his head as though he had been shot in the head. So it was a large amount of evidence.
Heck yeah. Now, in the first trial, and we've talked about this in past episodes when you were on the show, is Sandeson's defense involved these kind of unidentified men in morph suits coming in the home, making him like disconnect his cameras and them being the ones responsible. In the second trial, he has a completely different version of what went down. Do you want to give me kind of a basic version of William Sandeson's defense in the retrial?
So yes, during the first trial, he didn't take the stand, but through his lengthy interrogation video, we heard there were a variety of different stories, really. It kind of culminated in the one you mentioned with these morph-suited intruders bursting in through his roommate's window, and they put Taylor Samson in the bag that he had brought the drugs in, and they took off, and he didn't know if Taylor was dead or alive, right? That was the gist of it. But one significant thing that happened in the second trial is that those interrogation videos were never shown to the jury. Alison Craig was successful in getting those videos excluded, and that paved the way for William Sandeson to tell an entirely different story. So this time, he admits that he shot and killed Taylor Samson, but says that he did so in self-defense. And the story goes that there was another guy, Jordan McEwen. This is a little bit confusing, so bear with me here. There's this other guy who's the subject of a robbery at his home a couple of nights before this meeting between William Sandeson and Taylor Samson in August 2015. And that guy, Jordan McEwen, owed William Sandeson a bunch of money, drug debt. And so William Sandeson says that he believed that Taylor Samson had stolen from this other guy, Jordan McEwen. So he said it was his right to then steal from Taylor. So he had no intention of giving Taylor, he admits, the $40,000 for the 20 pounds of weed in this drug deal that they had arranged. So he says Taylor comes to his apartment and, he sees that he doesn't have all of the money, and things get a little heated and they jostle around the kitchen for a while. And then Taylor, he said, lunged at him. And so he pulled the trigger and shot him, and he fell backwards into the chair, which is where the other witnesses said they saw a man sitting with blood coming out of his head.
But what about the fact that Taylor's body was never found? How does Will Sandeson explain this in a way that would imply there was self-defense involved?
So he says that he kind of panicked after this. There was no real rhyme or reason to this cleanup. He's got around 2 hours before his girlfriend comes home. So he's scrambling around the apartment, cleaning up all this blood. And he puts Taylor Samson's body in his bathtub, he said. He lined that duffel bag that Samson had brought the drugs in with a towel, wrapped Samson's body in garbage bags, put it inside of the duffel bag, and put it in the trunk of his car where it stayed for the night. Then the next day, he drove his girlfriend and her friend to work with Taylor's body in the trunk of the car. And then he starts driving, according to him, somewhat aimlessly. And first he stops in Stewiacke at a gas station. He goes in, he buys a couple of drinks. He dumps one in a bag with Taylor's phone to soak the phone, he said. And remember, the police were never able to find Taylor Samson's phone, which would have also been a significant piece of evidence. And then Sandeson said he ditched that bag with the soaked phone in the garbage bin at that gas station. And then he keeps on driving toward his home, his parents' home in Truro, Lower Truro. And he drives along until he pulls off into this kind of gravel, small parking lot. And he takes the bag to the dike heads. And I went there myself, and I took the same route that he said that he took, and I pulled into this parking lot, and I used my Apple Watch to clock it. It's about 190 meters from where he would have parked to the dike heads, where he would have been concealed by the dikes themselves. And so then he says that he put Taylor Samson's body in a body of water that runs into the Bay of Fundy. And of course, people will know the Bay of Fundy, known for the highest tides in the world. Sandeson grew up on the Fundy Bay and says that he was always, warned as a child, even if the tide is out, don't go and play in the mud there because the tides could rush in at any moment and he would never be seen or heard of again. So if you believe his version of events, he was literally using a childhood safety lesson to try to get away with murder.
Oh. Wow. And what about, like, in the first trial, the main thing that led to the need for a retrial was the private investigator flip-flopping sides. Does this come into play at all in the retrial, or were they just able to have the witnesses just take the side of the prosecution or whatever and not have to deal with any of the baggage that came with the flip-flopping of the private investigator? Like, did this come into play at all?
It certainly did. In fact, Sandeson's new lawyer from Toronto, Alison Craig, tried to get the whole thing thrown out over this. She said, like, we should have a stay of proceedings and there should be no further trial because this was so egregious what happened. And then she said, and if we do have to go ahead, then these two star witnesses shouldn't be able to testify at all.
Which would be huge if the case. And when I heard of a retrial, that was my fear, is if that piece of evidence or that testimony is tainted as a result of that private investigator, it's going to be a uphill battle for a conviction without them.
It would have been a very significant for sure, which is, I think, why she fought so hard to get it excluded. But she wasn't successful in that. Obviously, the trial proceeded. And the judge ruled that, it would shock the community to not allow witnesses to the immediate aftermath of an alleged murder to testify. And furthermore, that it would be an affront to the truth-seeking function of the court to not allow that to happen. And so he said, while it was unfortunate the way that it had unfolded in the first trial, it had also been mitigated by the passage of 5.5 years. The defense had had time now to think through these novel legal issues and think about how to handle them. So the two witnesses were permitted to testify, and they did in the second trial as well.
I haven't met anyone who did not believe that Will Sandeson was responsible for Taylor's death. In the first trial, when the conviction was for first-degree murder, people were happy to hear justice is served. The second trial also ends in a guilty verdict, but as per the name of your book, it's not first-degree murder; it's second-degree murder that he was convicted of in the second trial. What is the difference, and why second-degree rather than first-degree from the second trial?
Well, the short answer is that we'll never know, because juries don't provide explanations for their verdicts. They just come back and they say not guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of second-degree murder, and we never get to know anything about what led them to that conclusion. However, I can give you some analysis as to what it means. So the main difference between first-degree and second-degree murder in this country is that first-degree is planned and premeditated. So what we can take away from this verdict is that this jury did not believe that William Sandeson planned to kill Taylor Samson that night. At least not all of them did, because remember, it has to be unanimous.
Interesting. And we don't need to get too deep into debating the decision, but I think if I'm looking at whether or not it was premeditated, what I would be pointing my finger at is the text messages that appeared to show Will Sandeson luring Taylor Samson to his house. But like you said, if a jury is split, if there's even one person holding out, they can all agree on second-degree murder, but maybe not all agree on first-degree murder. Like, I wonder if I guess it could be something as simple as that. But.
Well, we do have some more insight into that, actually, and we can see that when it comes to the sentencing. So there's a distinction, of course, between the sentence and the parole eligibility, right? So both first-degree and second-degree murder in Canada come with an automatic life sentence of 25 years. First degree comes with no parole eligibility until 25 years. For second degree, the parole eligibility period can span between 10 years and 25 years. And it's up to the judge to decide, but he's required to take recommendations from the jurors if they decide that they want to give those recommendations. They don't have to, and some of them can, some of them don't have to, and they don't have to be unanimous on that. They can all make different recommendations. So in this case, all 12 decided to make recommendations, and we can learn a lot about what they may have been thinking based on those recommendations. 9 of them recommended no chance of parole for 25 years. So we can take away from that those 9 people probably wanted to convict him of first-degree murder. 2 more suggested 22 years. So that's still really on the high end of things. They were probably leaning toward first degree. And there was 1 lone juror that recommended 10 years, which is the lowest possible. So we can take away from that perhaps there was one person who was the holdout. And as you said, it has to be unanimous, and they couldn't quite get there.
Mm-hmm. So he gets second-degree murder, comes with a life sentence. In his case, he is granted parole eligibility after 15 years. However, he's getting credit. Will Sandeson's getting credit for time served. So in reality, he can apply for parole, and I think it's like 7.5 years from his second conviction. Does that math make sense?
It does, which is about 5.5 years from now, right? So the judge decided on 15 years. He also takes into account recommendations from the lawyers. Alison Craig was recommending the minimum possible, 10 years, and the Crown recommended 22 years, which they acknowledged would be the highest ever in Nova Scotia's history for a contested hearing on second degree. This is different than if somebody pleads guilty to second degree, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the judge said, no way. If I do that, 22 years, this is a sure path to the Court of Appeal, and we're going to do this all over again. Mm-hmm. So he settled on 15 years, which at that time, as you said, was about, William Sandeson was already about halfway through, and he did get credit for time served, which is pretty typical.
Probably no surprise. This is finding its way somewhat into the Court of Appeal, where Will Sandeson did appeal his conviction, and even that there's a story behind that, because it sounds like, and maybe you can elaborate a bit on this, but it seems like he was appealing the conviction, but also like trying to get the government to pay for his appeal.
Yes, for his defense. He tried to get legal aid to fund it. He also applied for state-funded counsel. Both were denied. He appealed to legal aid again, and he appealed the decision to deny him legal aid, I should say. And he's still trying that, because now this all relates to a whole fascinating sidebar on the case, which has been discovered that he has a significant amount of assets in cryptocurrency, Bitcoin.
And when you say significant, like this murder is over like $40,000, but it turns out he has like over $500,000 in crypto.
Right. It wasn't valued at that back in 2015.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So the way that this unfolds, for a number of years, William Sandeson has been asking for his laptop back, and no one seems to know why, or really even seems to be paying too much attention to it, to tell you the truth, until he starts making an application before the court to get it back. And at this point, the Crown didn't want it to be released to him because, though it had not been used as evidence in the first trial, there was always a chance it could be. It did contain a significant amount of data and information on it. And so in 2022 is when he starts making a lot of noise about getting this laptop back. And the Crown says, we already gave you a copy of the hard drive. Why isn't that good enough? And this is when he says, well, because I can't access the cryptocurrency that's on the laptop, or that he would need the laptop in order to access the Bitcoin wallet. Oh. And so this is the first time that everyone sort of goes, oh, this
wait, what? Yeah.
Exactly. And so Taylor Samson's mother is sitting in court, as she has been for every single court appearance throughout the past 10 years. So she decides to get a lawyer. And so Linda Boutlier and Connor Samson, Taylor Samson's brother, are now suing William Sandeson for wrongful death under the Nova Scotia Fatal Injuries Act. And this has been a really dramatic thing that has been playing out simultaneously. It was totally aside from the criminal trial, but they were playing out simultaneously. And at one point, that Bitcoin, William Sandeson said it was worth around 8,000 to 10,000 Canadian in 2015 when he purchased it. By 2021, it was at almost $1 million, well up over 700,000. It has depreciated a little bit since then, but this is the way this works, right? It fluctuates. Mm-hmm. So I can tell you that at the beginning of this year, 2024, around 200,000 Canadian of that money had been liquidated into Canadian funds. The value of the remaining Bitcoin was 468,000. And the plan is to liquidate another 100,000 every January until all of this has been liquidated. And so, Taylor Samson's family will see some of that money. It remains to be seen how much they will receive, but I'm told that it'll be worth their while.
Wow. It's just a shocking twist in all this. And often you'll hear of like rumors of someone in prison or something that has, an investment or a large inheritance. But in this case, it comes out in such a unique and unusual way. It's true, not rumor. And it's kind of been a part of the story from the beginning. Because if I remember correctly, in the early days of the trial and the investigation, there was talk about him maybe applying through the courts to get access to his laptop. I think I remember that being a part of the story that was just kind of seemed like irrelevant, as if he was just kind of throwing a hissy fit about getting his stuff back. But
That's exactly it. He's been asking for the laptop for years from the very beginning, but he was sort of trying to do that outside the court process. And, his various lawyers who he's had working for him were asking, can we get that laptop back? And this is how he ended up getting a copy of the hard drive, which didn't allow him to access the Bitcoin, which was in the wallet.
Wow.
And so then the criminal court eventually said, okay, yeah, you can have a forensic image of the laptop, which would have allowed him to access the Bitcoin, which is when the civil matter began, when that lawyer said, whoa, hold on, we want an emergency injunction to prevent him from accessing these funds until our civil matter is dealt with. And then that happened.
And that was successful. Like that, the funds, this cryptocurrency is kind of like locked down until the civil matter is settled with Taylor's family.
That's right. It is now actually being held in trust by Weldon law.
Wow. What a story. There are so many moving parts to this, so many pieces of it. And it's like, I think this story and people following this story are lucky that a journalist like you has clung on to it and covered it since the beginning. Like the book First Degree was so incredible. And then when all these updates happen, the fact that the author of an incredible book takes it and updates it to account for all the facts. Like I think, like I said, people who follow the story are fortunate that you've dedicated your time to staying on the story and keeping your book current and up to date.
I really appreciate you saying that. It's been a lot of work, but I do really believe in it. And I believe that there are things that people should know about this case. And as a journalist who generally covers the day-to-day ins and outs of the news, it's been very satisfying to get to tell the whole story in this way, which I don't often get to do when I'm just filing, a 2-minute story for the news.
That's right. And I feel like this is the kind of thing that a lot of like journalism in Canada is missing, is like we hear so many short updates on stories, but very rarely does someone kind of put it all together, interview the people involved, get the emotion, every bit of it into one piece of work to present. And that's what First Degree was. And that's why I was like, when the retrial was granted, I thought like, oh, like it just makes the book obsolete in a way. But you're able to dedicate some time, which I don't know how you're able to do, but to get it up to date. And now for people who like, when we just spoke here, we're covering kind of the main events of the story, but your book goes so much deeper by sitting down even when you're reading the book, I feel like I'm sitting at a kitchen table with Taylor's mom hearing the story. Like you did such a great job of putting these interviews that you did into the book. And because of that, like I think anyone following the story, they need to get a copy. I have First Degree. I'm getting Second Degree date. I was planning to get it next week, I think, is when I thought the original release was.
The official release date was November 12th, but it just arrived in the Nimbus Publishing warehouse a little bit early. So it's been trickling out, but it's available in bookstores already.
Okay. Yeah. And that was what I just said was a long, complicated way to say people should get it. Where and how do they get it?
You can get it pretty much anywhere you would buy any book. It's on Amazon, Chapters, Kohl's, Indigo. I always have to give a plug for local bookstores. So important to support them. So I can tell you there are signed copies at Open Book on Strawberry Hill in Halifax. Bookmark on Spring Garden Road is another great place. I'm hoping to get in there this week to sign some copies.
I never get to ask an author this. Is it better for you if someone buys it on Amazon versus Chapters versus like a local shop? Like, of course you want to support local shops, but as an author, does it make a difference to you where someone gets it?
No, really what I care about is that people are reading it. I often get the question, is it okay that I borrowed your book from the library? Can I still come talk to you at a public event? And I always say, yes, you can still come talk to me. I'm always happy to talk about my writing. And I just, reading a book is a significant time investment. And so it's always very meaningful to me that someone has taken the time to sit down for hours and hours and read my work. And that's really what I care about.
I want to thank you for joining me for this episode of Nighttime. As evident by this story, Canada's legal system takes some odd routes to justice. But in this case, despite all the detours and the bumpy road, it seems to have gotten there for the most part. I'm now just left hopeful for a good outcome to the civil suit against Sandeson by the Samson family. It's my belief that they deserve every drop of potential assets that he has. Now, with all that said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part, I want to end with thanks. First, a huge thank you to Kayla Hounsell for sharing an evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. For anyone interested in hearing more from Kayla on this story, obviously get her original book, First Degree, if you can find it anywhere, and the newly released and expanded version, Second Degree. It's a masterclass in crime reporting. I also want to give a big thanks to Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this episode, and LJ from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides our intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. And now on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Kristen, Shanda, and Steve, we appreciate you. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can do it in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription is just a couple dollars a month, and that money funds the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those new episodes 2 days early, give them to you ad-free, and give you access to a full back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium right now at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know why they should be listening. If anyone out there has any story ideas, wants to give feedback on the show, or would like to submit a question or comment to be responded to in an upcoming episode, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com. I'm excited to hear from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.
Taylor Samson's mom leaves court after a jury found her son was the victim of second-degree murder.
I know it's not what we wanted. We wanted first. But we're going to take what we can get.
Samson arrived at Sandeson's apartment August 15, 2015 for a 20-pound marijuana drug deal. Sandeson told the jury he shorted Samson about $30,000, confronted him about an alleged prior robbery, and flashed his loaded handgun. He said he shot Samson in self-defense. Samson's mom thanked the Crown for their hard work and had some choice words for Sandeson.
He's evil. There's a special place in hell for him, and that's all I got to say.